Hello everyone. Welcome to the second online class session of Software Requirements Analysis and Specification, which is Unit 2 of the 5th semester course called Software Engineering, having the course code 15CS51T for the program called Diploma in Computer Science and Engineering from the Department of Collegiate and Technical Education, Karnataka. The agenda of this online session is to discuss about the components of an SRS like functional requirements, performance requirements, design constraints and external interface. Let's also discuss about the structure of a requirements document wherein we will learn about the organization of specific requirements as well. Well, before we begin the current session, let's have a brief recap of the previous session. In the previous session, we had learnt about what a software requirement is. So, a software requirement is a condition or a capability that must be possessed by a system to satisfy a contract or a standard or any other formally imposed document. A thorough analysis of existing system must be done to extract these software requirements precisely and completely, and later on has to be documented properly. The result of requirement phase is an SRS. And then we had learnt about the importance of a good SRS in the software development process. That is, SRS plays a very important role in establishing an agreement between the client and the supplier on what the software product will do. SRS provides a reference for validation of the proposed system. A good quality SRS is a must to produce a good quality software, as well as a good quality SRS reduces the software development cost. Well, we also had learnt about the requirement process and the three stages involved in the requirement process, which are requirement analysis, requirement specification and requirements validation. And finally, we had discussed about the various desirable characteristics of an SRS like correctness, completeness, unambiguity, verifiability, consistency and ranking for importance and stability. Now, let's begin with the current session. As we already know, achieving the completeness of SRS is quite a difficult task. But this can be accomplished by dividing the SRS into different components like functional requirements, performance requirements, design constraints and external interfaces. Let's have a look at each of these components now. Functional requirements constitute an important part of SRS document. Functional requirements specify what a software system must do and how it must function. Functional requirements describes the complete expected behavior of the system. It describes every functionality and every operation proposed system is supposed to perform. It also describes the inputs, their sources, units of measure as well as the range of valid inputs. It also describes the outputs and the relationship between inputs and outputs, etc. The behavior of the system for invalid inputs are also specified. Now let's have a look at some of the examples for functional requirements. Requirement number 1. A verification email is sent to user whenever user registers to the system for the first time. Example number 2. System must shut down in case of a cyber attack. Example number 3. Authentication of user whenever user logs into the system. In the first example given here, it is describing what should happen when the user registers for the first time. This specifies the functionality for a particular condition. Similarly, the next two examples are describing certain functionalities of the system. Therefore, these requirements fall into the category of functional requirements. Now let's see performance requirements. SRS must specify all the performance constraints of the proposed software system. Basically, there are two types of performance requirements. One, static requirements, which are also called as capacity requirements. Two, dynamic requirements like response time and throughput. Static requirements are those that do not impose constraint on the execution characteristics of the system. Static requirements include requirements like the number of terminals to be supported, the number of simultaneous users to be supported, and the number of files that the system has to process, etc. Whereas dynamic requirements specify constraints on the execution behavior of the system. These typically include response time and throughput constraint on the system. Response time is the expected time for the completion of an operation under specified circumstances. Throughput is the expected number of operations that can be performed in a unit time. For example, the SRS may specify the number of transactions that must be processed per unit time or what the response time for a particular command should be. Acceptable ranges of the different performance parameters should be specified, as well as acceptable performance for both normal and peak workload conditions should be specified. Performance requirements should be specified in measurable terms. For example, a statement like the response time of command X should be less than 1 second 98% of the times is an acceptable and measurable requirement. Performance requirement. Now let's have a look at few more examples for performance requirements. Number 1, the processing of each request should be done within 10 seconds. Example number 2, the site should load in 3 seconds when the number of simultaneous users are greater than 10,000. Both the examples here clearly specify the response time of the system for the particular operations to be performed. Therefore, these requirements belong to the category of performance requirements. Now let us have a look at the design constraints requirements. The various factors in the client's environment restricts the designer choices. These are resource limits, operating environment, reliability and security requirements, and policies that may have an impact on the design of the system. SRS should identify and specify all such constraints. For example, certain such factors or constraints are standards compliance, hardware limitations, reliability and fault tolerance, and security. Standards compliance may include the report format, accounting procedures, audit requirements, etc. Whereas hardware limitations includes types of machines to be used, operating system available, languages supported, and limits on the primary and secondary storage. Reliability and fault tolerance are major constraints on how the system is to be designed, as they make the system more complex and expensive. Security requirements are becoming increasingly important. These requirements impose restrictions on the use of certain commands. They also control access to data. They provide different kinds of access requirements for different people. They require the use of passwords and cryptography techniques. And they also maintain a log of activities in the system. Now let's have a look at few of the design constraints examples. Example number 1, system operates on Linux operating system. Example number 2, system uses MAS protocol for connecting IP application and Morse members. The requirements specified in the first example indicate that the software has to function on a particular operating system called Linux operating system. Therefore, this becomes a design constraint. In the second example, the type of protocol to be used is specified, that is MAS. Again, this becomes a design constraint. Now let us discuss the external interface requirements. External interface specifies the interactions of the software with people, hardware, and other software clearly. User interface is most important and hence should be given proper attention. A preliminary user manual should be created with all the user commands, screen formats, and an explanation of how the system will appear to the user. Like other requirements, these requirements should be precise and verifiable. For hardware interface requirement, the SRS should specify the logical characteristics of each interface between the software product and the hardware components, including memory restrictions. In addition, it should specify the current use and load characteristics of the hardware. Now let's see some of the examples for external interface requirements. Here the examples or the user interfaces used are VB.NET language for front-end software, and for the back-end support, SQL plus languages, SQL plus databases used. In the second example, the software interfaces that are used are Windows operating system for its best support and user friendliness, SQL plus database, to save the flight records, passengers records, etc. and VB.NET language to implement the project for its more interactive support. The communication interfaces used here are all types of web browsers and simple electronic forms which are used for reservation, ticket booking, etc. Now let's discuss the structure of a requirements document. The IEEE standard recognizes the fact that there is no one method or structure that is suitable for all projects. It provides different ways of structuring the SRS. The first two sections of the SRS are same in all of them. The general structure of an SRS is as shown here. The first section is Introduction section, which contains purpose section wherein the motivational factors and business objectives are specified. Next, the scope section, which specifies the scope of the project, followed by the sections definitions, acronyms and abbreviations, references and overview. The second main section in the general structure is overall description, which specifies the product perspective, product functions, user characteristics, general constraints and assumptions and dependencies. The next section is the specific requirements section. This section can be organized in different ways depending upon the project requirements. One of the methods of organizing for specific requirements is shown next. One method to organize the specific requirements is as shown here. At the first, external interfaces are specified, followed by functional requirements, performance requirements, design constraints, system attributes and other requirements section if any. The external requirements section specifies all the interfaces of the software to people, to other software, to hardware and to other systems. Whereas user interfaces specify each human interface including screen formats, contents of menus and command structure. In hardware interfaces, the logical characteristics of each interface between the software and hardware on which the software can run are specified. Hardware assumptions, if any, are also specified. This also mentions the communication interfaces to be used. The functional capabilities of the system are described in functional requirements section. For each functional requirement, the required inputs, desired outputs and processing requirements are specified. The performance section should specify both static and dynamic performance requirements. All factors that constrain the system design are described in the performance constraints section. The attributes section specifies some of the overall attributes that the system should possess. If there are any other requirements not covered under above sections, will be listed under Other Requirements section. So the conclusion we draw from this session is that a good SRS must specify all the functional requirements, performance requirements, design constraints, and external interfaces. Functional requirements describe what software system must do and how it must function. Whereas performance requirements describes all the static requirements and dynamic requirements. And design constraints specifies the requirements with respect to standard compliance, hardware limitations, reliability and fault tolerance, and security. And the external interfaces requirements specifies all the interactions or the interfaces used with people, hardware, and other software. Now let us go through a few of the multiple choice questions. Question number 1. Functional requirements specify number 1. Valid range of inputs. Number 2. Units of measure. Number 3. Desired outputs. Which of the statements given above is or are true? Option A, 3 only. Option B, 1 and 2 only. Option C, all of the above. Option D, none of the above. What is the correct answer for this question? Yes, the correct answer for this question is option C. That is all of the above. That means functional requirements specify valid range of inputs, units of measure, as well as desired outputs. Let's have a look at the next question. The question is, performance requirements comprises of number 1, capacity requirements, number 2, dynamic requirements, number 3, response time. Which of the statements given above is or are true? Your options are A, 2 and 3 only, B, 1 and 2 only, C, 1 and 3 only, D, all of the above. Do you know the correct answer for this one? Yes, the correct answer for this question is option B. That is 1 and 2 only. Performance requirements comprises of capacity requirements as well as dynamic requirements. Let's have a look at the next question. The question is, hardware limitations impose restrictions on number 1, operating systems to be used, languages supported, primary and secondary storage. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? Your options are option A, 3 only, option B, 1 and 2 only. Option C, 2 and 3 only. Option D, all of the above. So what is the correct answer here? So the correct answer here is option D. That is all of the above. That means hardware limitations impose restrictions on operating system to be used, languages supported, as well as primary and secondary storage. Let's have a look at the next question. Security requirements. Security requirements maintains a log of activities in the system, restrict the use of certain commands, provides different kinds of access to different people. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? Your options are option A 1 and 2 only, option B 2 only, option C 3 only, option D all of the above. So do you know the correct answer for this question? The correct answer for this question is option D. That is all of the above. That means security requirements maintains a log of activities in the system. They also restrict the use of certain commands and they provide different kinds of access to different people. Let's take up the next question. The question here is description of interface between the software product and hardware components includes memory restrictions. Your options are false, true. What is the correct answer for this? Yes, the correct answer for this question is option B, true. That means the description of interface between the software product and the hardware components does includes memory restrictions. Let's have a look at the next question. The question here is the key aspect of introduction section in the general structure of an SRS is to clarify number 1, the relationship of the product to other products. Number 2, principal interfaces of the product. Number 3, business objectives and scope of the project. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? Your options are A 2 and 3 only, B 1 and 2 only, C 3 only, D none of the above. Do you know the correct answer here? Yes, the correct answer for this question is option C. 3 only. That is, the key aspect of introduction section in the general structure of an SRS is to clarify business objectives and scope of the project. Let's have a look at the next question now. One method to organize the specific requirements is to first specify external interfaces followed by functional requirements, performance requirements, design constraints, and system attributes. Your options here are option A true, option B false. What is the correct answer for this question? Yes, the correct answer for this question is option A true. That is, one method to organize the specific requirements is to first specify external interfaces followed by the functional requirements, performance requirements, design constraints, and system attributes. Let's have a look at one more question. So the question here is other requirements section in specific requirements organization includes system attributes. Your options here are A false, B true. Do you know the correct answer for this? Yes, the correct answer for this question is option A false. That means in other requirements section, specific requirements does not include system attributes. So these are the answers for the multiple choice questions we have been solving in this session. I hope you have answered all the questions correctly. The source of reference used for this online session are the textbooks Software Engineering, A Precise Approach by Pankaj Jalote, A Concise Introduction to Software Engineering by Pankaj Jalote. I would like to hereby thank the author of these books, Mr. Pankaj Jalote. Thank you, sir, and thank you, everyone.